Good evening. I'm Captain Marcus Brooks. After 28 years in the skies, I thought I'd seen every kind of passenger. The nervous flyers, the frequent flyers, the ones who sleep through turbulence that would wake the dead. I was wrong. Tonight, let me tell you what happened on Flight 1189. The gate at O'Hare was nearly empty at 9:40 p.m. Most of the shops had already pulled their metal gates halfway down. A janitor pushed a cart slowly past rows of blue seats, where a handful of tired travelers waited for the last flight of the night to Seattle. Elena Vasquez sat by herself near the window. A paperback closed in her lap, her boarding pass tucked inside it like a bookmark. She was 36, dressed plainly in a dark green jacket and jeans, her hair pulled back. She hadn't opened the book in 20 minutes. She was watching the runway lights blink in the dark, the way she always did before a flight, counting them without meaning to. It was a habit from another life. She didn't like to think about why she still did it. 2 rows away, a man in his 50s sat gripping a leather folio case a little too tightly for someone who was just flying home from a business trip. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was an aerospace engineer, and he had spent the last 6 months building a case that could end the career of a man he used to respect. Tomorrow morning in a federal courtroom in Seattle, he was going to testify that the bolts his former employer, Hallbrook Aerospace, had certified as flight safe were in fact substandard. The same bolts linked to 2 cargo plane failures that investigators had quietly blamed on pilot error. Daniel had the internal emails. He had the test data. He had everything. What Daniel didn't have was any idea that someone already knew. Flight 1189 was a red-eye, a Boeing 737 with 174 passengers, scheduled for a 4-hour flight to Seattle. Captain Marcus Brooks had flown this route more times than he could count. Clear night, mild winds, nothing on the forecast to worry about. He shook hands with his first officer, a sharp young woman named Officer Priya Desai, and they ran through the pre-flight checklist the way they always did. Calm routine, unremarkable. At 10:05 p.m., the plane pushed back from the gate. Elena settled into 12C, an aisle seat toward the middle of the cabin. She was asleep or close to it before the wheels even left the tarmac. She had learned to sleep anywhere, anytime. Another leftover skill from years where sleep was never guaranteed and rarely restful. The young man beside her, a college student named Marcus Webb, no relation to the captain, just a coincidence he'd joke about later, noticed how still she went. Not restless like most people trying to nod off on a plane. Just gone. Like she'd flipped a switch. 40 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant named Grace was doing a routine cabin walkthrough when she noticed something odd near row 23. A small black case, no bigger than a paperback, wedged into the seat back pocket in front of an empty seat. A seat that had gone unsold that night. It wasn't a phone charger. It wasn't anyone's forgotten bag. When she leaned down for a closer look, she heard a faint, rhythmic clicking sound coming from inside it. Steady, mechanical, deliberate. Grace did not scream. She did not touch it. She walked calmly to the front galley, picked up the interphone, and called the cockpit. "Captain, I need you to hear this," she said, her voice low and even, despite the pounding in her chest. "There's a device in 23F. It's making a ticking sound. I don't think it's an accident." Captain Brooks felt the temperature in his chest drop 10 degrees. 28 years and this was new. Captain Brooks did the math in seconds. 174 people. A device with a ticking sound. No way to land immediately. They were 40 minutes out over open country, nowhere close to a diversion airport, with the right runway length for an emergency landing in under 15 minutes. He needed information before he needed altitude. "Grace, do not touch it. Do not let anyone near row 23. Move people quietly if you can," he said. "I'm making an announcement." He thought about panic. 174 people, half of them asleep, all of them trapped in a metal tube 6 miles above the ground. He couldn't say the word bomb. He couldn't say anything that would put 20 people into the aisle at once. But he needed help, and he needed it from someone who actually knew what they were looking at, because neither he nor Officer Desai had ever handled anything like this outside of a simulator. He picked up the intercom. "Good evening, folks. This is your captain. Sorry to interrupt your rest. We have a minor technical matter in the cabin, and as a precaution, I'd like to ask, is there anyone on board with a background in explosive ordnance disposal, military demolitions, or bomb technician training? If so, please press your call button. Thank you for your patience." The cabin lights were low. A few people stirred. Most didn't register the words at all, half asleep, half annoyed at being woken for something so oddly specific. But in 12C, Elena Vasquez's eyes opened. She didn't sit up right away. She lay still, staring at the seat back in front of her, running the words back through her mind. Explosive ordnance disposal. She hadn't heard that phrase spoken out loud in 3 years, not since she'd taken off her uniform for the last time and told herself she was done thinking about wires and pressure plates and the particular quiet that comes right before something goes wrong. Marcus Webb next to her noticed her hand tighten slightly on the armrest. She pressed the call button. Grace reached her within a minute. "Ma'am, did you need something?" "I heard the announcement," Elena said quietly. "I was an Army EOD tech, 3 tours. Tell the captain I'm here." Grace studied her for half a second, the calm in her voice, the stillness in her hands, and hurried toward the front. Word reached the cockpit. Captain Brooks looked at Officer Desai. "Bring her up, quietly." Elena walked up the aisle without drawing attention, the way she'd been trained to move through crowded, dangerous places without becoming the center of anyone's story. She stepped into the cockpit, and Captain Brooks turned to face her. "Elena Vasquez," she said. "Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army retired. Explosive ordnance disposal, 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 Iraq." Marcus Brooks, 28 years commercial, no military background, so I'm going to need you to talk me through everything. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We have a device in seat pocket 23F. Flight attendant says it's ticking. We're 40 minutes from Seattle, 30 from the nearest suitable diversion airport in Boise, but that runway's short for an emergency full-brake landing with this much fuel on board." "Has anyone touched it?" "No." "Good. That's the most important thing anyone's done right tonight." Elena's voice was even almost gentle, but there was an edge of total focus underneath it. "I need to see it before I can tell you anything useful. I also need you to think about who was sitting near that seat, who got up during the flight, and who was on the ground crew for this aircraft in the last 48 hours. Officer Desai pulled up the manifest. Row 23 was mostly empty that night. 23F itself was unsold. The seats around it, 23D and 23E, were occupied by an elderly couple who had been asleep since boarding and hadn't moved. "There's a passenger in 4B I think you should know about," Officer Desai added, scanning further. Special handling note flagged him at check-in. A security advisory came through from the airline's corporate security desk 2 hours before departure. Federal witness protocol. Passenger's name is Daniel Reyes. He's under a standard travel advisory tied to scheduled court testimony tomorrow morning. Captain Brooks looked at Elena. "You think this is connected?" "I think it's too convenient not to be," Elena said. "Someone plants a device on a nearly empty row on a flight carrying a witness set to testify tomorrow, and it starts ticking 40 minutes in. That's not random. That's timed." Elena moved back through the cabin with Grace walking slow, and even the way she used to walk toward a suspicious pile of trash on a roadside in Kandahar. She didn't rush. Rushing was how people died. She'd learned that the hard way more than once, watching it happen to men better trained than her. She knelt in the aisle beside row 23. The elderly couple gently moved to empty seats near the front, by another flight attendant told only that there was a maintenance issue nearby. Elena studied the case without touching it. Small black hard shell, the kind you'd use for camera equipment. A faint mechanical ticking steady once per second like a kitchen timer. She leaned down close enough to listen, but not close enough to disturb the air around it. Her heart rate did not change. Her hands did not shake. This was the strange gift and curse of her training. Her body had learned a long time ago to go quiet, exactly when everything else in the world was screaming. "Talk to me," Captain Brooks said over Grace's headset, patched through quietly so only Elena and the cockpit could hear. "It's small," Elena said. "Too small to bring this plane down on its own if it's what I think it is. The ticking is mechanical, not electronic. That tells me something. Most modern devices don't tick. This might be older tech, or it's built to sound like something it isn't." "Meaning?" "Meaning this might not be a bomb at all," Elena said slowly. "It might be built to make us think it is." She reached into the small emergency kit Grace had brought her, a multi-tool, a flashlight, a pair of nitrile gloves, and working with slow, deliberate hands, unlatched the case's outer clasp, 1 centimeter at a time, watching for resistance, watching for wires connected to the hinge. Inside was not a bomb. It was a small tape recorder, rigged to a kitchen timer, wired to trigger at a specific elapsed time after takeoff, and beside it, a single sealed envelope with Daniel Reyes's name written on it in block letters. Elena carried both items to the cockpit, her expression unreadable. Captain Brooks opened the envelope with gloved hands Grace had also brought up front, just in case. Inside was a single typed page. "You should have taken the settlement, Daniel. This was your only warning. Next time it won't be a recording." Captain Brooks read it twice. "This isn't an explosive," he said. "This is a threat." "It's worse than that," Elena said. "It's proof that whoever did this had access to this aircraft, this specific seat, and knew Daniel Reyes would be on this flight tonight before he testifies tomorrow. That means someone inside Holbrook Aerospace, or hired by them, had detailed knowledge of a federal witness's travel schedule that should have been confidential." Officer Desai looked between them. "We need to get Reyes up here." Daniel Reyes arrived in the cockpit 2 minutes later, pale, his hands trembling slightly around the leather folio he'd refused to leave at his seat. When Captain Brooks explained what had happened, carefully, without alarming him further than necessary, Daniel sat down hard in the small jump seat. "They knew," he whispered. "They knew I was on this flight. They knew the seat number. Nobody should have known that except—" He stopped. "Except who?" Elena asked. Daniel looked up slowly. "Except my attorney's office, and the airline's own security desk because they flagged my file for the travel advisory." His voice cracked. "Somebody on the inside leaked my itinerary." Elena crouched slightly so she was at eye level with him. "Mr. Reyes, I need you to understand something. Whoever did this wanted you scared, not hurt. If they'd wanted this plane down, they had the means to make it look like an accident, not send you a threatening note in a fake bomb casing. This was meant to make you back out of testifying tomorrow. That means your testimony still matters, probably more than ever." Daniel's hands finally stopped shaking just slightly. "You really think that?" "I know it," Elena said. "Fear is a tool people use when they've run out of better options. You're not looking at the actions of a company that feels safe. You're looking at the actions of one that's terrified." Captain Brooks got on the radio to air traffic control and requested a priority landing in Seattle, with law enforcement standing by, along with an explosive ordnance disposal team from the nearest military installation, to formally clear and process the device once they were on the ground. Protocol required it, even though Elena's assessment had already brought the temperature in the cockpit back down from crisis to controlled. "ATC copies Flight 1189. Seattle is aware. Law enforcement will meet you at the gate." The remaining 40 minutes of the flight passed the way flights are supposed to pass. Quiet, dark, mostly unremarkable to the passengers in the cabin, most of whom had no idea anything had happened at all, beyond a strange captain's announcement they'd already half forgotten. A few noticed the woman from 12C hadn't come back to her seat for a long while. None of them knew why. Flight 1189 landed in Seattle at 1:52 a.m., 9 minutes behind schedule. FBI agents met the plane at the jet bridge, along with a bomb disposal unit that confirmed within the hour what Elena had already determined in the aisle at 35,000 feet. The device was inert, built only to frighten, not to harm. The recorder and the letter were taken into evidence immediately. By morning, investigators had traced the seat assignment leak to a contract employee at the airline security vendor, who had been paid in a cash transfer later uncovered through banking records by a shell account linked to a Halbrook Aerospace subcontractor. It wasn't a billion-dollar conspiracy with untraceable masterminds. It was smaller, and in its way sadder than that. A mid-level executive who panicked at the thought of a federal conviction and made a desperate, clumsy attempt to derail a witness the night before he was set to speak. Daniel Reyes testified the next morning exactly as planned. His hands didn't shake at the podium. He later said it was because he kept thinking about a woman in a green jacket, telling him calmly that fear like that only comes from people who've already lost. Elena didn't go looking for credit. When federal agents interviewed her at the gate, she answered every question plainly, without embellishment, the same way she'd once given after-action reports in another life. She told them what she'd seen, what she'd done, and why. When they thanked her, she nodded once and said she was glad she could help, and she meant it. What none of the reports mentioned, what none of the news coverage that followed ever captured, was the smaller truth underneath all of it. Elena Vasquez had gotten on that flight, not for any reason bigger than needing to be in Seattle for her sister's wedding rehearsal the next day. She hadn't planned on being anyone's protector that night. She had simply been unable, even 3 years removed from a war zone, to fully put down the instinct that made her body go still and her hands go steady the moment something felt wrong. She had spent a long time in therapy trying to decide whether that instinct was a gift or a wound. That night, for the first time in a while, it felt like both, and that felt strangely like healing. 6 weeks later, Elena received a letter. It was handwritten from Captain Marcus Brooks. He told her that in 28 years of flying, he'd handled storms, engine trouble, and difficult passengers, but he had never faced a night like that one, and he never wanted to again. Except that if he had to, he was grateful it had happened on a night when she happened to be in seat 12C. He wrote that he hoped the wedding had been beautiful. He wrote that he hoped she was sleeping a little easier these days. She read it once at her kitchen table, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. Not to forget it, but to keep it. That's the story of Flight 1189. People ask me sometimes what I learned from a night like that. I think about it more than they'd probably guess. I learned that the people who save us rarely look the part beforehand. They're not wearing a uniform. They're not announcing themselves. They're just sitting quietly in row 12 carrying something inside them that the rest of us can't see until the moment it's needed. At 35,000 feet, everyone wears the same seatbelt. It's what people carry inside them, not what they carry in their bags, that decides who we become when it matters most. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There are more flights and more people like Elena waiting to be told.